"Dr. Morgan, you need to see this," called Dr. Patel, his voice tight with controlled panic. Elena tore her eyes away from the readouts and joined him at the main observation window. The Chicago skyline had transformed completely. Where the Willis Tower once stood, a spiraling structure of impossible architecture now reached toward the clouds. The familiar grid of city streets had been replaced by curved thoroughfares that pulsed with soft blue light. "What happened to our city?" whispered Sarah Chen, joining them at the window. Elena's scientific mind raced through possibilities. The quantum stabilizers didn't just fail, they created some kind of dimensional shift. We've somehow moved into an alternate reality. But how? Sarah pressed. The temporal displacement device was designed to move through time, not between dimensions. The equations predicted potential bleed-through between parallel worlds at extreme temporal coordinates, Elena replied, moving quickly back to her workstation. But nothing like this should have happened with a 1-hour jump. The Institute's security system suddenly activated, sealing all external doors and windows with reinforced barriers. On the security monitors, Elena watched as sleek hovering vehicles surrounded the building. Tall, slender figures emerged, distinctly non-human in their proportions and movement. "They can't see us," Dr. Patel observed, checking the quantum field readings. The temporal experiment created some kind of bubble effect around the Institute. We exist slightly out of phase with this reality. "That won't last forever," Elena said grimly. "The quantum bubble is already degrading. We have 72 hours at most before we fully phase into this timeline." "And David?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly as she mentioned her brother's name. Elena pulled up the temporal tracker display. "His quantum signature is still detectable, but it's fragmented. He's not in one place or time. He's scattered across multiple temporal coordinates." The team fell silent, the full weight of their situation sinking in. They were stranded in an alien reality with limited time before discovery, their colleague and friend lost in the time stream, and no clear way to return home. Elena straightened her shoulders, her mind already formulating a plan. "We need to understand this world before we can find a way back to ours. Sarah, analyze any biological data you can gather on these beings. Raj, work on extending the quantum bubble's integrity. I'm going to focus on locating and potentially communicating with David." "And if we can't go back?" Dr. Patel asked quietly. Elena's expression hardened with determination. "Then we find a way to restore our timeline from here. One thing is certain, this world isn't how things are supposed to be." As her team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Elena returned to the temporal displacement console. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across her face as she began the painstaking process of tracking a man scattered across time itself. Outside, one of the alien beings paused, its elongated head tilting slightly as if sensing something just beyond perception. It stared directly at the Cronus Institute, at the building that shouldn't exist in its reality, before rejoining its companions in their sleek vehicles. The chess game across time and dimensions had begun. Elena studied the Eric's historical records with growing unease. The aliens hadn't simply conquered Earth, they had methodically rewritten human history through subtle manipulation. According to the data crystal, humans now believed the Erics had been their benevolent guides since ancient times, slowly revealing their presence throughout history at key moments. They positioned themselves as gods at first, Elena explained to her team, scrolling through images of ancient temples that clearly depicted the elongated Eric's form. Then as angels, advanced humans, and finally as evolved cousins returning to help us. But why? Sarah asked, examining genetic sequences displayed on another screen. Why not simply take over by force? Because they need us for something, Dr. Patel suggested. These biological scans show they've been making subtle adjustments to human physiology over generations. Elena switched to another file, revealing complex molecular structures. They're terraforming us, not the planet. Making humans more compatible with something. But what? The building trembled slightly, a reminder that their quantum bubble continued to weaken. Outside, the alien city pulsed with activity as night fell, streets illuminated by soft blue bioluminescence that required no visible power infrastructure. "I've been monitoring their communications," Sarah said, turning to her workstation. They had a hierarchical society based on what they called temporal perception, essentially how far into probability futures they can see. The highest-ranking Erics can apparently perceive hundreds of potential timeline variations. "That might explain why they invaded Earth," Elena mused. "If they can see multiple potential futures, they would choose the path that most benefits their species." A soft ping from Elena's temporal tracker interrupted their discussion. The fragmented signal from David had suddenly strengthened, coalescing into a coherent pattern. "He's trying to communicate," Elena said, fingers flying across the controls. "I'm going to attempt to establish a more stable connection." The lab's main display flickered, static resolving into a distorted image of David. He appeared simultaneously younger and older than when he'd left, his features occasionally blurring as if multiple versions were overlapping. "Elena," his voice crackled through the speakers. "Can you hear me?" "David, where are you?" "How?" "No time," he interrupted, his image flickering. "Listen carefully. The Erics aren't just aliens. They're timeline engineers. They detected our temporal experiment because they monitor all potential probability branches." "How do you know this?" Elena asked. "I'm experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously," David explained, his expression pained. "In some, the Erics never came to Earth. In others, they arrived centuries earlier. The divergence point isn't 1988. It's now. Our experiment." The image destabilized further, David's form becoming increasingly transparent. "They're coming for the Institute," he warned, voice breaking up. The quantum bubble attracted their attention. "You need to." Static consumed his words. "Find the resistance. Jin Park. Subway Level 3, Old Millennium Station. Tell him." More static. "Timekeeper Protocol." The connection failed entirely, leaving the lab in stunned silence. "Millennium Station," Sarah repeated. "That's less than a mile from here." Elena reached a decision. "We need to split up. Sarah, you and half the team maintain the Institute as long as possible. Raj and I will find this Jin Park and the Resistance." "And if we don't return?" Sarah asked. "Then send the temporal coordinates we've gathered to every system you can access," Elena replied grimly. "Someone needs to know what really happened." Commander Maya Ortiz led Elena and Raj deeper into the Resistance complex. The abandoned subway tunnels had been transformed into a surprisingly sophisticated base of operations, with salvage technology and repurposed Erics devices throughout. "We've been gathering intel for years," Maya explained, gesturing to a war room where maps and holographic displays tracked Erics' movements across the city. "Most humans accept their presence without question, but some of us experienced what we call temporal echo memories, fragments of the original timeline bleeding through." "That's how you knew something was wrong," Elena realized. Maya nodded. "We remembered a world without them, but couldn't explain how or why. Your quantum accident theory finally gives us answers." Jin Park approached with a small device that resembled a neural interface. "This is what we use to identify other unaltered humans," he explained. "The Eric's influence manifests as subtle brainwave patterns that our scanners can detect. We've been using these to locate potential recruits," added Zora, tapping commands into a modified Eric's console. "But recently, the Erics have been developing a similar technology to identify us." The urgency of their situation became clearer as Maya brought them to a secure communications center. 3 days ago, our monitoring systems detected increased activity around the Erics Temporal Security Division. They've been scanning for quantum anomalies across the city grid. "They're looking for your institute," Jin concluded. "And by extension, all of us." Elena shared what they had learned about David's fragmented existence and the message about the Timekeeper Protocol. Jin and Maya exchanged meaningful glances. The Timekeeper protocol was theoretical, Jin said carefully. A last resort option developed by our science division. We never thought we'd actually implement it. What exactly is it? Raj asked. A synchronized temporal disruption, Maya explained, using modified ARIX technology to create deliberate instabilities in their probability field. The theory was that we could momentarily blind their temporal perception, creating a window of opportunity for a direct strike. But it required a quantum anchor point, something existing partially outside normal spacetime. Jin added, something like your institute. A sudden alarm blared through the complex. Zara rushed to a monitoring station. ARIX patrols converging on the north entrance. They've found us. How? Maya demanded. Our shielding should have prevented detection. They're using a new scanning frequency, Zara replied, eyes wide. One we haven't seen before. They're adapting, Elena realized. In response to the quantum anomaly our presence created, Maya made a swift decision. Activate evacuation protocol beta. Jin, take Elena and her colleague to the workshop. If we're implementing the Timekeeper protocol, they'll need the prototype. As resistance members rushed to defensive positions, Jin led Elena and Raj through a maze of tunnels to a secured laboratory area. Inside, a device combining both human and ARIX technology hummed with potential energy. We designed this based on theoretical models of ARIX temporal technology, Jin explained, initiating a startup sequence. It's intended to create a cascading disruption in probability fields, essentially scrambling their ability to perceive timeline variations. Will it work? Elena asked. Jin's expression was grim yet determined. Honestly, we've never had the right conditions to test it, until your institute created the perfect quantum anchor point. The sounds of energy weapons and shouted commands echoed through the tunnels, growing closer by the second. Elena studied the equations David had transmitted, trying to make sense of the quantum resonator concept. The resistance bunker hummed with frantic activity as they prepared to relocate after narrowly escaping the ARIX raid. These calculations are like nothing I've seen before, she told Raj, who was helping her analyze the data. It's as if David's experiencing quantum mechanics from the inside, perceiving the mathematical relationships directly rather than theorizing them. The ARIX probability manipulation must operate on principles similar to our quantum theory, but vastly more advanced, Raj suggested, tracing complex formulas with his finger. David's fragmented consciousness is somehow accessing that knowledge. Zora joined them, carrying components salvaged from their previous base. We lost 12 people in the evacuation, she reported grimly. Maya is coordinating our remaining teams to gather the materials you'll need for this resonator device. The temporal receiver suddenly activated on its own, its display flickering with new data. Elena rushed to calibrate it, capturing another transmission from David. Elena, quantum resonator requires ARIX crystalline matrix. Harmonic frequency 957.3 terahertz creates temporal standing wave. A standing wave in time itself, Elena breathed, understanding dawning. That's brilliant. What does it mean? Zara asked. Imagine ripples in a pond, Elena explained, sketching quickly on a notepad. When waves from different sources meet, they can either amplify or cancel each other out. David's suggesting we create a temporal standing wave, a pattern that remains stable amidst the chaos of timeline fluctuations. And that would accomplish what exactly? Jin asked, joining the conversation. It would create a fixed point, a nexus where multiple timelines converge, Raj explained, catching Elena's train of thought. From there, we could potentially navigate to our original reality. A resistance scout burst into the room. Commander Ortiz needs you immediately. Something's happening topside. They rushed to the monitoring station, where Maya stood transfixed by surveillance feeds showing the city above. ARIX vessels hovered in formation over major intersections, projecting holographic announcements to the population below. We're translating their broadcast now, Maya said, adjusting controls. The translated message filled the room. Attention human citizens. Temporal irregularities have been detected in your sector. These disturbances represent a significant threat to timeline stability. Any individuals experiencing memory anomalies or questioning established historical records must report to RX Wellness Centers immediately for harmonic realignment. Failure to comply will result in probability exclusion. They're going public with the search, Jin observed. They must be getting desperate. Or confident, Maya countered. This is the first time they've openly acknowledged timeline manipulation to the general population. Alina's attention was drawn to subtle patterns in the Urix vessel's formation. They're not just making announcements, they're scanning. Those ships are arranged in a probability amplification grid. How could you possibly know that? Jin asked. Alina held up the equations from David. Because it's right here. They're creating a city-wide temporal detection net. Soon they'll be able to locate anyone with timeline divergence awareness, including all of us. The implication struck everyone simultaneously. Their timetable had just collapsed from days to hours. How close are we to building this quantum resonator? Maya asked. We have the design, Alina replied. But we're missing a crucial component, an RX crystalline matrix tuned to the exact frequency David specified. Zara's eyes lit up with dangerous determination. I know where we can get one. But it won't be easy. It never is, Maya replied. What's the target? The primary RX synchronization tower, Zara said. The heart of their temporal control network. First Sentinel Ketlau stepped onto the observation platform of the synchronization tower, his multifaceted eyes surveying the Chicago skyline. The quantum disturbances had grown stronger over the past 12 hours, creating ripples in the probability field that even lesser RX could detect. Report, he commanded his second-in-command. The divergence points continue to multiply, she responded, displaying a holographic map showing dozens of pulsing anomalies across the city. We've narrowed the primary source to this sector, but the human resistance has implemented some form of temporal masking. Primitive but effective, Ketlau acknowledged. Their ingenuity remains their most unpredictable quality. He accessed the tower's central crystalline matrix, a glowing blue structure that served as the nexus of RX temporal operations on Earth. Through it, they maintained the subtle probability manipulations that kept human development on its prescribed path. The humans have activated a temporal receiver, he noted, studying the energy patterns. They are communicating with a consciousness that exists outside normal space-time. Impossible, his second-in-command protested. Humans lack the technology to. Yet they have achieved it, Ketlau interrupted. Alert the Council. I am initiating protocol temporal purge. His subordinate stiffened in alarm. First Sentinel, that protocol has never been implemented on an inhabited world. The consequences are necessary, Ketlau completed firmly. These humans have demonstrated temporal awareness beyond acceptable parameters. The timeline deviation must be corrected at its source. Maya reviewed the holographic model of the synchronization tower as her team finalized their infiltration plan. The crystalline matrix is housed in the central chamber on level 47, she explained. Security will be heaviest there. We'll need a diversion, Zara suggested, pointing to auxiliary structures surrounding the tower. If we disable these relay stations simultaneously, it should force them to reallocate security resources. Elena studied the quantum scanner she and Raj had modified from Oryx technology. We've detected unusual energy patterns within the tower. They're preparing something substantial, a major temporal operation. How soon? Maya asked. Hours, maybe less, Raj answered grimly. Jin entered the planning room with urgent news. Our scouts report increased RX activity throughout the city. They're deploying temporal stabilizers at major intersections, creating a grid that will lock this version of reality in place. They're trying to make this timeline permanent, Alina realized, cutting off any possibility of restoring the original flow of events. Which means we move now, Maya decided. 3 teams. Alpha Team creates diversions at the relay stations. Beta Team provides cover for the extraction. Gamma Team, that's you, Alina, Raj, and Zara, goes for the crystalline matrix. As the resistance fighters prepared their equipment, Alina received another fragmented transmission from David. Alina, Oryx initiating temporal purge. Complete probability lockdown. Must secure matrix before. The transmission cut off abruptly. Alina tried to re-establish the connection without success. What's a temporal purge? Raj asked, concern evident in his voice. Nothing good, Alina replied, checking her equipment with renewed urgency. But David got through enough to confirm we're on the right track. The crystalline matrix is the key. Maya approached with final instructions. Our transport leaves in 10 minutes. If any team fails, the others continue the mission. This is likely a one-way trip for many of us. We understand, Alina said, making eye contact with each of her companions. One more thing, Maya added, handing Alina a small device. Emergency temporal recall beacon. If everything goes wrong, at least one of you needs to make it back to your institute with the Matrix. It's our last hope. Outside their hidden base, the sky had taken on an unnatural purplish hue as Oryx technology began the process of probability lockdown, sealing the fate of an entire world. Ascending from the underwater structure felt like moving through layers of reality. Alina's mind raced with implications of what they'd discovered. The temporal anchor hadn't been Oryx technology at all, but something far older and more sophisticated. The equipment we found was military-grade diving gear from the 1970s, Alina told Sarah and Zara when they returned to the boat. How could David have been there decades before our experiment even happened? Perhaps time isn't as linear as we believe, Sarah suggested, examining the detailed scans they'd taken of the underwater structure. David's consciousness seems to be experiencing multiple points simultaneously, which means he could potentially influence events across different eras, Raj added, still dripping seawater onto the deck. Alina replayed David's recorded message, focusing on his specific instructions for modifying the anchor. Something about his delivery troubled her, a tension in his voice she'd never heard before. He sounds like he's under pressure, she noted, as if multiple versions of himself are competing for control. The boat's radar suddenly pinged with multiple contacts approaching rapidly from the north, sleek vessels moving at impossible speeds across the waves. Oryx watercraft, Zora confirmed, adjusting the surveillance equipment. 5 of them, on intercept course. How could they have followed us through time? Sarah asked, alarmed. Alina's gaze returned to the ocean's surface, where barely perceptible ripples marked the location of the submerged structure. They didn't follow us. They were already here. David's message mentioned that the Oryx were drawn to this location. They must have been monitoring it across multiple timelines. The timeline shift when we modified the anchor wasn't complete, Raj realized. We're in another transition state, a reality still in flux. The distant whine of approaching Oryx craft grew louder. Zora prepped the boat's engines, ready for a desperate escape attempt. Wait, Alina said, studying the instruments that monitored temporal fluctuations. Something's happening. The ocean around them began to shimmer with an opalescent light. Waves seemed to move in contradictory patterns, some flowing backward against the prevailing current. The horizon itself appeared to ripple like a mirage in desert heat. The modifications we made to the anchor, they're propagating through the timeline, Alina explained, watching readings spike across their monitoring equipment, creating a cascade effect across multiple probability branches. Sarah pointed toward the approaching Oryx vessels, which had suddenly slowed, their sleek forms becoming translucent before solidifying again in slightly altered positions. They're experiencing temporal flux. Their probability perception is being disrupted. The sky above darkened momentarily, then cleared to reveal subtly different cloud patterns. Birds that hadn't been there seconds before now circled overhead. The very air seemed to taste different. We did it, Raj breathed. We've shifted to another timeline branch. Not our original one, Elena cautioned, comparing quantum baseline readings with their records. This is something new, a splinter reality. The Eric's vessels had vanished completely, replaced by ordinary fishing boats in the distance. But other changes were equally apparent. The coastline visible on the horizon showed different contours, with structures that hadn't existed in either their original timeline or the Eric's dominated one. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, voicing everyone's primary concern. Elena checked the temporal coordinates against astronomical references. Wind is the same, May 17, 1988. But where? She trailed off, studying satellite data from their equipment. This reality appears to have developed along a completely different technological path. Human, but not our version of human history. Their instruments suddenly detected a new temporal signal, stronger and more coherent than any of David's previous transmissions. It contained coordinates for a location thousands of miles away, accompanied by a simple message. *QOTNVERGENC point identified. Washington, D.C. National Mall. The TIMALINESRBGNing to MERG*. The journey to Washington, D.C. revealed a world both familiar and strange. This version of 1988 featured technology that shouldn't exist for decades. Compact holographic displays, magnetically levitated public transportation, and buildings constructed from programmable materials that shifted configuration throughout the day. This timeline developed without Eric's interference, Elena theorized, as their borrowed vehicle approached the capital. But it followed a completely different technological path than our history. "Look at the energy infrastructure," Raj pointed out, indicating vast arrays of crystalline collectors that surrounded the city. They appear to be harvesting atmospheric electrical potential, technology we theorized but never successfully implemented. The National Mall came into view, its familiar layout of monuments intact but with subtle differences. The Washington Monument had been constructed with some kind of translucent material that captured and refracted sunlight in prismatic patterns across the grounds. As they neared their destination, reality itself began to show signs of instability. Pedestrians occasionally flickered, momentarily displaying alternate versions of themselves. Different clothing, hairstyles, even genders, before settling back into a single form. Buildings shimmered with ghostly overlapping architectures. "The temporal convergence is accelerating," Elena said, checking their modified Eric scanner. Multiple timeline versions are bleeding through at increasing frequencies. They parked near the monument and made their way across the mall. Other people seemed oblivious to the reality fluctuations, their perceptions apparently limited to the timeline they belonged to. There, Zora pointed. A figure stood at the base of the Washington Monument, or rather, multiple overlapping figures that seemed to phase in and out of each other. As they approached, the figures resolved into variations of David, each slightly different, but recognizably him. "Helena." They spoke in unison, their voices creating an eerie chorus effect. "You made it, David." Elena reached toward him, but hesitated, unsure which version to touch. "What's happening to you?" "I've become a nexus point," the Davids explained, their movements perfectly synchronized. "My consciousness exists across multiple timeline branches simultaneously. I'm experiencing every potential reality where our experiment took place." "How is that possible?" Sarah asked. "The quantum displacement didn't just send me through time. It scattered my quantum signature across the multiverse." The Davids gestured to the monument behind them. "In every reality, this location maintains consistent spatial coordinates despite architectural differences. It's the perfect alignment point for what comes next." The sky darkened suddenly, not with clouds but with what appeared to be overlapping versions of itself. Different weather patterns, different times of day, even different celestial bodies visible simultaneously. "The timeline convergence is reaching critical threshold," the Davids warned. "Soon, dozens of potential realities will collapse into a single dominant timeline. Which version survives depends on what we do in the next few hours. Alina removed the Eric's crystalline matrix they'd recovered from the underwater structure. We modified the temporal anchor as you instructed. What now? We need to construct a quantum stabilization array. The Davids replied, multiple hands reaching for the matrix simultaneously before one version solidified enough to take it. This matrix will serve as the focal point, but we need more components. A low rumble shook the ground as the membrane between realities thinned further. In the distance, impossible structures began to materialize. Massive Eric's architecture bleeding through from other timeline branches. They found us, David said, his overlapping versions temporarily unifying in their concern. Ketlao exists in multiple timelines as well, and in each one, he's hunting us. We have very little time. Above them, the Washington Monument began to pulse with energy, responding to the temporal disruption like a tuning fork to a specific frequency. Reality itself seemed to be awaiting their next move. The stabilization array took shape around the Washington Monument, a hybrid of technologies from multiple timelines. Belina and Raj worked alongside scientists who had appeared from other realities, drawn to this nexus point by forces they barely understood but driven by the same goal: to prevent complete temporal collapse. The crystalline matrix is accepting the modifications, Elena reported, watching as the Eric's technology pulsed with new patterns under her adjustments. It's synchronizing with the monument structure. David, now more cohesive as his fragments gradually aligned, nodded in approval. The monument itself contains quantum resonance properties in every timeline. Humans may have built it for different reasons across realities, but its fundamental relationship to Earth's geomagnetic field remains constant. In the sky above, reality continued to fracture. Sections of atmosphere displayed different weather patterns, different times of day. Through some tears in the fabric of space-time, glimpses of Eric's worlds became visible, vast cityscapes of impossible architecture where humanity existed in subjugation. Ketlao materialized on the mall, flanked by Eric's troops from multiple timeline branches. Unlike his soldiers, who flickered between different versions of themselves, the first sentinel maintained a singular, focused presence, a testament to his mastery of temporal perception. Impressive, the Eric's commander acknowledged, studying the array. You've managed to create a primitive form of our convergence engine, but you cannot comprehend the forces you're manipulating. We understand enough, Elena countered, continuing her work on the final calibrations. You're not preserving reality. You're forcing it to conform to your preferred version. We are guiding probability toward optimal outcomes, Ketlao corrected. Your species lacks the perception to navigate timeline potentiality safely. Left unchecked, human temporal experiments would eventually shatter the multiverse. David stepped forward, his form now fully unified though glowing with internal energy. That was true once, but something unexpected happened when I was scattered across the time stream. I gained perspective you lack, the ability to see connections between realities rather than just the branches themselves. The air between them shimmered as temporal energies built toward critical threshold. Raj completed the final connections to the array, while Alina aligned the matrix to David's specifications. Humanity's greatest strength has always been adaptability, David continued, addressing Ketlao. We don't need to control all potential futures. We thrive by embracing uncertainty and change. Noble sentiments, Ketlao replied, but irrelevant. The temporal purge is already underway. This nexus point will collapse into a single timeline, ours. Elena activated the stabilization array. Energy surged through the modified crystalline matrix into the Washington Monument, which began to glow with intensifying light. The structure acted as a conduit, channeling temporal energy upward into the fractured sky. You misunderstand our intention, Elena told the Eric's commander. We're not trying to erase your timeline or restore ours. We're creating something new. David stepped into the center of the array, his body becoming translucent as he interfaced directly with the temporal energies. Neither dominance nor separation, he said, his voice resonating across multiple frequency bands. Synthesis. The monument erupted with blinding light that expanded outward in concentric rings. Where the energy touched the fractured reality, something remarkable happened. Instead of one version overwhelming others, the timelines began to merge harmoniously, creating a new integrated reality that incorporated elements from multiple branches. Ket Lao watched in astonishment as his own form began to transform, his perception expanding beyond Eric's limitations. "This is unexpected," he admitted as understanding dawned. A cooperative convergence rather than competitive selection. Elena could feel her own consciousness expanding, memories from other timeline versions of herself becoming accessible. She understood now what David had experienced, not fragmentation, but unity through diversity. Time travel didn't go wrong. She realized as the new reality crystallized around them. It went exactly as it needed to.